When you think about India's longest border, your mind probably jumps straight to those towering Himalayan peaks shared with China, right? Or maybe the heavily guarded lines drawn with Pakistan. But get this, India's longest land border is actually with Bangladesh. We're talking a massive 4,096 kilometers. And unlike the straight, mountainous lines of other borders, this one is incredibly porous. It's a winding, twisting path that just cuts right through rivers, fields, and even people's backyards. It acts as this living, breathing space of constant, everyday interaction. All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we are embarking on a seriously breathtaking geographical journey. We're going to look at the immense, wildly diverse geography of India. We'll start at the absolute macro scale, wrapping our heads around the subcontinent's sheer size and its quirky time zones. And then we're going to travel down into its ancient living river veins. These are the natural systems that literally shape the history of this land. So, here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at the grand Indian canvas. Then we'll scale the mighty Himalayan wall. And finally, we'll trace the paths of three phenomenal river systems: the ancient Indus network, the sacred Ganga basin, and the fierce Brahmaputra flow. Let's kick things off with Section 1, the grand Indian canvas. Now, India's vast scale on the globe is honestly kinda hard to fully wrap your head around until you look at the raw numbers. Take this number, for instance, 120. There is a fascinating time anomaly hiding in there. Because India stretches across roughly 30 degrees of longitude, it creates a massive 2-hour or 120-minute solar time gap between its easternmost tip in Arunachal Pradesh and its westernmost edge in Gujarat. See, the Earth takes about 4 minutes to rotate exactly 1 degree. Multiply 4 by 30, and boom, you get 120 minutes. So when the sun is rising at 5 a.m. in the east, the west is still dead asleep in the pitch black of 3 a.m. Yet, just to keep everything unified and running smoothly, the entire country operates on a single standard time anchored right in the middle at 82.5 degrees longitude. Just imagine what that does to your biological clock depending on which side of the country you live on. And this actually brings us to a geographical paradox that trips a lot of people up. Both the north to south span and the east to west span cover roughly 30 degrees of the Earth. But if you look at the actual kilometers, the north-south distance is quite a bit longer than the east-west distance. Why is that? Well, think of the Earth like a giant orange. The latitudinal lines, going north to south, are like perfectly parallel rings. They're always the exact same distance apart. But those longitudinal lines going east to west, they're like the grooves separating the slices of the orange. They naturally converge and get squeezed closer together as you move toward the poles. So, simply put, moving across those shrinking lines up north means your actual kilometer distance east to west ends up being shorter. Moving right along to Section 2, the mighty Himalayan wall. So, the Himalayas, they aren't just one simple monolithic wall. If you look at the northernmost part of India, you'll see a really complex sequence of totally distinct mountain ranges. Going strictly from north to south, we hit the Karakoram, then Ladakh, then Zanskar, and finally the Perpanjal. But here is the truly mind-blowing part. Those ranges in the very north, what we call the Trans-Himalayas, like Karakoram and Ladakh, they actually formed before the main Himalayan wall even existed. They're literally a geological prequel. And geographers don't just look at horizontal layers, they also slice these mountains vertically. The ranges are naturally segmented into distinct regions by these incredibly ancient rivers. Check this out. The Indus to the Sutlej brackets the Punjab Himalayas. The Sutlej to the Kali frames the Kumaon Himalayas. Then, the Kali to the Teesta marks the towering Nepal Himalayas. And finally, the Teesta to the Dihang borders the lush Assam Himalayas. So these rivers essentially act as natural, incredibly old borders cutting right through the rock. Which leads us perfectly into Section 3, the ancient Indus network. This river network isn't just a pretty geographical feature, it is the cradle of one of the world's absolute oldest civilizations. The Indus is what geologists call an antecedent river. Now, let that sink in for a second. It existed before the Himalayas were even formed. When the Indian tectonic plate crashed into the Eurasian plate and those mountains began to slowly thrust upward, the Indus was like, nope, I'm not moving. It didn't change its path. Instead, it acted like a giant saw cutting through a rising piece of wood. Over millions of years, as the rock pushed up, the water just kept cutting down, carving out staggering 5,200-meter deep gorges. The river literally won a staring contest against the rising mountains. And because this river system is the absolute lifeblood of the entire region, its waters are incredibly precious. This brings us to the 1960 Indus Water Treaty, brokered by the World Bank. It's a really remarkable and enduring geopolitical agreement between India and Pakistan. The treaty cleanly divided these lifeblood waters to sustain agriculture and power in both nations. Control of the three western rivers, the Indus, Jhelum, and Chenab, went to Pakistan, while the three eastern rivers, the Ravi, Beas, and Sutlej, went to India. And, despite numerous conflicts over the decades, this treaty has held remarkably strong, proving just how vital shared natural resources are to regional stability. All right, on to Section 4, the Sacred Ganga Basin. This is a sprawling, life-giving network that acts as the mother of the Northern Plains, literally supporting hundreds of millions of people. But here is the secret of the Ganga. At its absolute source, it isn't even called the Ganga. It's built piece by piece. The real hero up in the mountains is the Alaknanda River, which acts as this sort of master collector. It walks down a sequence known as the Panch Prayag, or 5 confluences. It gathers water and strength at Vishnu Prayag, then Nanda Prayag, Karna Prayag, and Rudra Prayag. It's only at that 5th and final step, Dev Prayag, when the mighty Alaknanda merges with the turbulent Bhagirathi River, that the combined ultra-powerful flow officially becomes the Ganga. As the Ganga and its main tributary, the Yamuna, flow down through the plains, they pick up a lot of water from the south, which actually brings up a really fascinating geographical quirk. Why does the Betwa River, which is a tributary of the Yamuna, seem to flow backwards from south to north? Well, it all comes down to topography. The peninsular plateau of India actually tilts northward. So gravity does its thing and pulls rivers like the Betwa, the Son, and the Chambal up north to join the main Ganga-Yamuna system. It perfectly demonstrates how the hidden underlying slope of the land completely dictates the flow of life. But I have to tell you, not all tributaries are quite so predictable. Enter the Kosi River. It's a left-bank tributary coming straight down from the Himalayas, and it is heavily choked with mountain salt. Tons of sand and rock it drags down from those peaks. When it finally hits the flat plains, it loses its momentum and slows way down, dumping all that silt. And by doing that, it essentially blocks its own path. So to get around its own debris, the river violently changes direction. Get this, it has shifted its course up to 120 kilometers over the last century alone. Because of this wild, totally unpredictable nature that unfortunately causes devastating floods, it is historically known as the Sorrow of Bihar. And that brings us to our final river system, Section 5, the fierce Brahmaputra flow. If the Ganga is viewed culturally as a nurturing mother, the Brahmaputra is defined by its immense kinetic energy, its raw power, and its constantly shifting identity. Seriously, this river is a master of disguise. It undergoes this dramatic transformation as it crosses borders. It starts all the way up on the flat Tibetan plateau as a calm, super slow-moving stream called the Tsangpo, which translates to the purifier. But as it smashes through the Himalayas into Arunachal Pradesh, it morphs into the raging, gorge-cutting Dihang. Then, once it hits the Assam plains and merges with a few other rivers, it finally takes the name Brahmaputra. And then, as if that wasn't enough, when it crosses into Bangladesh, it changes its name one last time to the Jamuna. So, what's up with the sudden personality change? Why is a river that originates so peacefully in Tibet suddenly so incredibly fierce when it enters India? Well, the answer lies in a spectacular geological feature. After flowing east for about 1,600 kilometers, the river hits the towering 7,782-meter Namcha Barwa Peak. And right there, it pulls a massive, dramatic U-turn, just a total hairpin bend, plunging off the plateau and barreling down the steep Himalayan gradient. That sudden, massive drop in elevation turns a quiet little stream into an absolute raging torrent of kinetic energy. Because of this sheer, unbelievable speed and energy, the river is able to carry millions of tons of debris. We're talking massive rocks, silt, and sand. It essentially acts as liquid sandpaper, aggressively carving out the land as it rushes through the mountains. But similar to the Kosi, when it finally hits the flat plains of Assam, it hits the brakes. It slows down and deposits all of that rich, incredibly fertile silt. And this brings us to the truly dual personality of the Brahmaputra. On one hand, it's a terrifying force that routinely floods and aggressively erodes its banks, causing massive destruction. But simultaneously, all that deposited silt acts as a deeply nurturing force. In fact, it deposits so much earth that it actually built Majuli. Majuli is the largest inhabited river island in the entire world, sitting right smack in the middle of its flow. It is the ultimate destroyer and the ultimate creator, all wrapped into one.
And this perfectly brings our macro journey to its micro conclusion. The epic journey of these waters finally ends when the Ganga, which at this point is called the Padma, and the Brahmaputra, now called the Jamuna, merge together in Bangladesh. This colossal union of two of the world's absolute greatest rivers slows down to a crawl as it meets the sea. And as it does, it deposits millennia of Himalayan silt to form the Sundarbans. It is the largest, most biologically diverse delta on the planet, and it was entirely built by the tireless, never-ending work of these rivers.
Which leaves us with a final, kind of provocative thought to chew on today. We've just seen how nature completely ignores the arbitrary lines we draw on our maps. So, if a river's name, its speed, its physical character, and even the very water molecules within it are constantly changing from the glaciers all the way to the sea, what is its true identity? Is it the water itself, the path it carves, or maybe the civilizations it sustains along the way? The geography of this vast subcontinent isn't just rocks and water. It is alive. It's constantly shifting, and it really reminds us that the lines on a map are just a tiny, tiny part of a much grander, ancient story. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer today, and as always, keep questioning the world around you.